everyone, I'm Lavanya from Europedia, and today we are going to discuss writing task 1 in academic, and in that specifically, we are going to discuss bar graphs. So, in a writing task, you have to basically write a report. That is, you have to summarize all the information that is given in a pictorial form, that is a bar graph, line graph, or maybe a map, into words. Okay, for this, you have to write a minimum of 150 words. What does this mean? That you have to write at least 150 words, though you can exceed it to any amount. You can even write 250 words if you want. You can write 200 words, but try to write somewhere around 150 to 200 words because that is a safe thing, and also you're not wasting your time writing a lot and lengthy paragraphs which are not even needed. So just exceed this limit, and that is fine. Now you have to write this in less than 20 minutes. 20 minutes is the maximum amount of time you should spend for your writing task one. It would be great if you try to do this task in 15 minutes, which is actually very possible. With practice, you will see that all the bar graphs, line graphs, even maps are very similar. So once you get the layout in your mind, and if you get, the basic points on how to do this, you can actually very easily attempt this in 15 or less minutes even. Okay, the style of writing for any academic writing task is a formal style. So try not to use any abbreviations, try not to use words that are informal. Okay, so even words like kids or mother, mom or dad, these words should be avoided at all costs. Always maintain a formal era, that is, use children instead. Okay, say father or mother. Okay, and in the same way, try not to abbreviate your words. So don't use can't or even don't. Okay, so these are wrong. You have to use cannot or do not. Okay, so these are the basic things you need to know about any academic task for IELTS. Now in this, we will now discuss a specific question so that you can know how to write a task in academic writing task one, and also all the tips and tricks you need to know to get an 8 band or even a 7 band if you want to. So this is the question for today. And if you're a student who's already aware about how to write a report on a bar graph, it would be great if you pause this video right now and attempt the task and then come back so that we can, discuss it. But for students who have no clue about how to do this, just fast forward the video to 10 seconds and then we will start discussing it. All right. So let us start discussing the question. I believe everyone who wanted to do the question has done it. Now, in this, the first thing you need to do is understand what the question is saying. This is very obviously a bar graph given to you, and it is talking about 4 different countries: India, China, US, and Japan. What you do have to do in this question is that the chart below shows the percentage of whole world population in 4 countries from this year to this and projections till this year. So they're talking about 3 different years with a gap of 50 years, that is half a century in them. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. Understanding this line will actually really help you get a good band score in your writing task one. So they're asking you to only report the main features. That is, you do not need to actually mention every single thing, every single figure in this question, and make comparisons wherever relevant. Making comparisons is a way where you can summarize information easily in a report. So if you are going to make comparisons, let's say from China and India, because we can see an opposing trend, here it is increasing, here it is decreasing, it will actually help you a lot while describing the information. Same way, maybe you can point out the similarities in US and Japan, because they are the ones with the least percentage of world population. So in this way is the one that this is the first thing you need to notice when you're going to do your writing task one. Okay. Now we're going to discuss the basic structure of a task and how you can, present your information in a cohesive manner so that you understand everything and the invigilator understands everything. So in this, we will begin by structure. So the first thing you need to know is that in any writing task, even task one or two, we're going to write 4 different paragraphs: an introduction, a body paragraph one, a body paragraph two, and an overall statement. We do not call this a summarizing statement or an overview. It's always an overall statement. This is your closing statement. All right. So we'll get back to this after we are done with the other above parts, but just remember for now that this in any writing task one, or academic is an overall statement. Okay, so starting with introduction. In your report writing, you have to know that in introduction, you don't need to write more than one or two sentences. So one or two sentences is absolutely enough of time for you to mention everything that needs to be there in introduction. So your introduction will include two major sentences. Okay, these will be, first it will include what kind of graph is given. Okay, so this is a bar graph, or you can call it a bar chart, even a column graph. And the second is what it is saying. Okay, or what it is presenting or depicting. In this question, we know this is a column graph. So that will be the first thing. So you can say the given bar graph or the given column graph compares the changes in 4 different countries. But the thing is, we have already said this in the question in exact way, the 4 different countries, right? So we have to basically paraphrase the question in the first sentence of introduction in a way that it doesn't sound repeated. You will just use synonyms for everything. So if I have to write an introduction for this, I can just say that the given bar graph compares the changes in the proportion of population. Again, instead of saying percentage of the whole world population, I'll just say proportion of world population in India, China, US, and Japan. I'll just mention the names of the 4 countries. Okay, in year 1950 to 2000, and contains predictions. Instead of saying projections, I can say predictions in the year 2050. Okay, so this is the first sentence of your introduction, and that is enough actually. You don't need to write anything else in introduction. You just have to say what the graph is talking about and what kind of graph it is. These are the major things that you have to say. If you feel like your introduction is too small, like if you have to write, you want to write something else, then you can mention one fact that is in your graph that will not be repeated in your body paragraph 1 or 2. This fact normally is something that stands out the most. Okay, so if I look at this graph alone, the first thing that stands out to me is that China had the highest level of population, the highest proportion of population in the year 1950, which was above 25%. That is, it was more than a quarter of the whole population. So I can just mention that. At a cursory glance, this will be a second sentence in the introduction. I'll say it is clear from the first look at the graph, or you can say at a cursory glance, it is obvious that China had the highest percentage of the world population in 1950 and 2000, but it might be predicted, or it is predicted, that India will take over this in the year 2050. Okay, so notice in the introduction, I have mentioned what kind of graph it is, what it is depicting, and I pointed out the most obvious fact, which is the highest portion of population in the 3 different years that are given. Okay, so China had the highest population between 1950 and 2000, and it is predicted that in India there will be the highest population of the world in the 4 countries in 2050. Okay, now as I was saying this, you must have noticed the tenses that I had used. Okay, so India will have the highest population in 2050. That means I have used a future tense. When I was describing China in 1950 and 2000, it used to have, or it has. It had, I mean. So that way I'm using a past tense. So any information that is presented to you that happened before 2023, this will be given in the past tense. That is, you will use was, were, had. Okay, anything that happens after 2023 will be given in the future tense. Okay, so you use words like will, predicted, projected. Okay, so this is very important because this is a lot of students use a lot of marks. So always make sure whenever you're giving any statistics, any figures about years from before or after the present year, you have to use the correct tense to explain it. Okay, so this alone is your introduction. 1 to 2 sentences is absolutely accurate when you're going to write your writing task 1 in report writing. Okay, so this is enough. Now we'll move on to explaining this whole thing in body paragraph 1 and body paragraph 2. And yes, for anyone who's wondering if you have to make 2 different body paragraphs, I would absolutely recommend you make 2 or more body paragraphs. Like 2 is the minimum. You can make a body paragraph 3 or even a 4 one. That is all right. But 2 is the minimum. You have to divide information into different ways. Okay? For any question, there are always multiple ways you can attempt a bar graph. Sometimes students like to prefer explaining information about what happened in 1950 first, and the next paragraph they do it about 2000, and then they make comparisons with it in the year 250. That is completely all right. There are other students who want to do it country-wise. That is, they compare India and China together, and then they compare US and Japan together, or any other way. That is also all right. You can pick any method that you feel is, most easy for you to attempt the question and go with it. These are all correct. The only thing is that you are doing it in a comprehensible way. If we start with China, because that is the one figure that stands out the most, because these are the highest ranges, and because I have mentioned that in my introduction. So in my BP1, I want to start with China. So I'll start it with 1950, as in I'll say something like in 1950, China accounted for a little over a quarter of the whole world population. Instead of saying 26%, because that's just too direct, I will say over a quarter. A quarter is 1/4. Okay, so China had over a quarter of the whole world's population. In the next year, it decreased a little, but still had the highest population, which was around 24%. Okay, so I have presented the same information, the same figures in two different ways, and you can use these tricks and methods to, use your sentences in a different way to make your information sound a little bit more elevated. After that, in the last year, that is in 2050, it is predicted that China's population will drop tremendously, because this is a big drop if we actually think about it, from 24% to 19%, or you can say it will drop by 6%. Okay, so after that, I will actually compare China with India, because in China I can see that this is a decreasing trend, and in India it is an increasing trend. And in the last year, we can see that India, preceded China in the world population, in the portion of world population. So after that, I'll compare India and China together. That is, India, on the other hand, I literally like this. India, on the other hand, showed an increasing trend of population from the year 1950 to 2050. In a century, India's population gradually increased from 15% to 21%. Okay, so in this way, you can present your information by comparing and pointing out similarities from different years and different countries, and you can use different ways to present this information. You have to take special note of how you're going to do this. Okay, there are a number of ways, and if you hear this video very carefully, you will actualize it. So in BP1, I have compared India and China and presented their figures. Now, I will not repeat what I've said before in the introduction. I will not say that China had the highest world population at this, or that India exceeded it in this. I will just state the figures directly. That is it. As in, I will not mention that one fact that was given in my introduction again in my BP paragraph 1. Okay? So now moving on to body paragraph 2, I will explain what happens in US and Japan. In US, there is a decreasing trend, and in Japan too. So I can start the sentence that when it comes to the population of US and Japan, both showed a decrease from 1950 and to 2000, and they're expected to show a further decrease in the next 50 years. Okay, then I'll just give specific figures of what happens in each year, or maybe you can just say that Japan from the year 1950 to 2050 will have an increase of, let's say, about 3% or 2%. Okay, same way you can do it with USA. So this is how I will divide my information in two different body paragraphs and present different information. Now let's come to overall statement. An overall statement, first of all, the reason I call it an overall statement is because you never summarize a report. So using words like in conclusion to summarize is absolutely wrong in your writing task 1. You will always use this word specifically, overall, exactly as the first word of every closing statement. Okay, so here you'll say overall, comma, and then you start writing whatever is left. I want to mention here that Japan has always had the least population in over the century. So I can just say, overall, Japan had the least population in the given period, and the population is expected to decrease approximately by 3% or 2% by 2050. Okay, so this one fact about Japan will not be repeated in this body paragraph too. Okay, so this is how I have summarized all the information, all the specific points that had to be done in this task. Now, this same thing will be noticed in all other body paragraphs or like bar graphs too. And the same thing will actually be noticed in your line graphs. So line graphs are actually very similar to bar graphs. And the vocabulary that is used to describe them and everything is very similar to them. So for any bar graph that you get in the future, you have to use the same method. Always point out, one most obvious fact, namely the highest figures in your introduction after writing what type of graph it is and what it is showing. And you have to always show what it is depicting by, paraphrasing your question statement. Basically, do not use the same exact words, use different synonyms for this. After that, you will just divide information on in two parts for a body paragraph 1 and 2. You can make another body paragraph if there are a lot of other graphs or the figures there. And then any one fact that has been left in your body paragraph, you will mention that in your overall. Okay. Now, many students are confused what to write in your introduction fact and overall statement even after a lot of explanation. To put it very simply, in your introduction, if you want to just fix something to write the highest things. That is the highest peak whenever whatever reaches that, write that. And in your overall, write the lowest figures. Okay. So keep these saved for introduction and overall specifically, and everything else and even specific figures should be mentioned in body paragraph 1 and 2. Another thing you can do is that in introduction and in your overall, do not mention the specific figures. Just say that this had the highest figures or statistics for this, or this had the highest, lowest, least statistics or least measured statistic for this or that. Okay, so you can do this for your overall and your introduction statement. Now, I'll give you certain tips. Before that, this is a sample answer that you can use. You can take a screenshot here and just read it over once to know how to attempt a task. This is a 8-band writing. So if you write somewhere around this level, you will get a good score in writing. But if you're committing any errors in, let's say, prepositions or tenses, then you have to look at it very carefully and try to use, correct grammar, and you have to make sure that your whole report is comprehensive and it is presented in a good way. Okay, take a screenshot of this because it is very important for you to actually read a good task before you start writing. All right, then now let us come to the tips. The very first thing you need to know and realize is that you do not need to write every single figure given in the graph down in your summary. You do not need to write everything. Remember when we were doing graphs about Japan right now, and it had a decreasing trend? It was, I think, from somewhere from 5% to 3%, right? You don't actually need to mention that in 1950, the figures Japan had over like 5% of the world population. In 2000, it was around 4%, and then in 2050, it is predicted to decrease to 3%. You don't need to do that. A very smart way to actually summarize this information is that Japan noticed a decreasing trend of the population, and it decreased from 5% to 3% in a course of 100 years, in the course of a century. That's it. Okay, so this way you can actually save yourself a lot of time and you can present the information in a better way. You don't need to mention every single figure, especially if you present it in a way that the reader can actually visualize the graph in their mind. All right. Second thing you need to know is that try to present your figures in different ways. As we were doing the question, you must have noticed we used many different ways of presenting information. Sometimes we said by the amount of, the figures decreased. That is, maybe in 2000, the figures were at 4%, but then the next year, they decreased to 3%. So instead of saying 3%, I can say that they decreased by 1 further percent. Okay, so you can measure that in one way. That's one thing. The second thing would be if you just write the information in brackets. That is Japan's population in 1950, and then I'll just write whatever, let's say 5% decreased further in the next 50 years, and then again there I'll write by 4%. So you can actually present the information in brackets. This method actually avoids, whenever you attempt a task, you will notice you'll use these words, that is, or which is, These words are often repeated a lot by many students, and you can avoid doing this if you start writing the information in brackets. The third way you can present your information is by using words. That is, whenever we are doing information about Canada, or I think it was actually US or China, I think it was China. So when we were presenting information about China, you would have noticed that we use words like over a quarter or just under a quarter. So you can use words like this to present your information. So using three-fourths, almost half, 50 years can be called half a century, 100 years can be called a century. This way you can present your information in little different ways. Another point that is actually related to this is that you need to use a different sentence structure so that it is not repeated over and over again. That is, make sure that you are using a different type of sentence every time. Do not repeat the same structure in the whole sentence. Every single sentence should not look something like this. And this year, this country has these figures. In this year, the country had these figures. In this year, the country had these figures. If you're repeating the same sentence with different figures every single time, then you will not get a good score in your writing task ever at all. Okay, so make sure that you use different structures to present this information. After that, you have to decide what to write in the introduction and your overall statement clearly and before you even start. This is very important. That is, you have to make sure that whatever information you're going to write in introduction and in overall is not repeated what is written in your body paragraphs. For that, you have to decide what you're going to write there before you start writing. That is, spend some time to actually plan your information out, and that is important. Then the next task is try to finish your task one in 15 minutes. With enough practice, it is absolutely possible to finish it in 15 minutes. You only have to write 150 words of minimum, and that is not a lot of words. So try to practice enough so that you can do this in 15 minutes. Last but not the least is the golden rule, that is practice. Always practice writing the most. Writing is an active skill, so it takes much more time to perfect your writing than it takes to perfect your reading or listening. That is the reason why you need to practice one writing task every single day before your IELTS preparation. Okay, so try to spend 15 to 20 minutes daily on writing a task, and then you will be perfect. So for this practice, I'm actually going to give you a question that you can attempt on your own. And this is the question. All right. This is another bar graph, or you can call it a column graph if you want to. Try to time this and write down, and then you can even share your questions and answers with us if you enroll yourself in our program. All right. So this was it for today. Have a good day, and we'll see each other next time. Thank you.